Hello my dear friends, you are in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 6th of February of 2024. Today we have a lot of very interesting details, geolocations, so let's start. And first, as usually these days, we're going to start with Avdiivka direction. As you can see, we have a lot of geolocations, a lot of icons above the territory of the stronghold. Obviously every single one means something, and maybe you are following the situation without even the channel. I believe you read a lot of updates, and today there was too many updates, different things, something very important, something not important, something that not important but was shown as something important, and something that very important but was shown as something like secondary. So let's try to discuss and let's try to figure out the real situation and what is really important that happened in Avdiivka. The first update is coming from the northern part, from the residential area. By the time the Russians bypassed the residential area, we started receiving more and more updates about the beginning of to withdrawing civilians who had waited for the Russians. This is very important update because always when there are civilians, they always slow down the offensive operation, and now it's very difficult to understand whether it was the position of Ukrainian forces who were abandoning the territory and they forced the Ukrainians civilians to stay in the basements, and when the Russians get the line, now they need to spend additional time to evacuate civilians to the mainland. So anyway, this from the first perspective, this is good that the Russians are let's say saving and evacuating the civilians, but from another side we understand that this situation slows them down. Now we're moving to the fields between the chemical plants and the residential area, and according to another day of reports, we got another mapper confirmation that as a result of offensive operation, the Russians established complete control over this territory. Yet we haven't received even a single geolocated confirmation of this progress, but let's add this territorial map for better understanding of possible progress of the Russians. Now we're moving to this block, and I believe that you are already familiar with the streets like Железнодорожная street, like Donetskaya street, like Lesi Ukrainki street, and many other streets, and most of them are located in this, let's say, square between these 9 blocks, 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 blocks, and this is the main area of main clashes and the most heavy clashes in Avdiivka. And once again, according to, for example, pro-Ukrainian resource Deep State, this territory was captured by the Russians, and so let's add additional territory of Russian control here. And according to most of the mappers, most of the more or less reliable resources, currently the heaviest clashes are taking place exactly for the railway bridge, for the railway and the bridge above this territory. So this is the main area of main clashes on this direction. This very important area, because if the Russians are able to force the Ukrainians to step back, to dig in deeper in this territory, this is the gates for the next residential area that located between the chemical plant and current territory of Russian control. And if the Russians are able to get here and to establish control over this territory, then this is going to be the end of Avdiivka offensive operation. And the next they're going to be just the days of just a regular military routine with significant losses from the Ukrainian side and very low losses from the Russian side. During the day, while the Russians were attacking this territory, of course the Ukrainians tried to send some reinforcements, some reserves. First, some batches were moving from the chemical plant, some batches were sent from industrial aid from the southern and the central part, while the Russians were attacking the railways and the bridge above this. The Russians, to slow down the Ukrainians at least a little bit, were bombing the chemical plant and the central part of Avdiivka with FAPs heavily. Of course, obviously that tactics helped the Russians to slow the Ukrainians down and maybe even to prevent sending of any reinforcements and reserves to the railways. Currently we don't have any updates, any additional information whether the Russians managed to establish control over the bridge or not, but anyway, according to the narrative of days that we received these days, the situation develops in the Russian favor and not in Ukrainian way. So which means that very likely the Russians did establish control over the bridge and continue advancing further to the main Ukrainian, let's say, support line that goes along Industrialny Ave. So this is the situation on this sector. When talking about the let's say the central part in the Blue Lake. We got more updates, and some interesting piece of news reported today was reported by the Russian sources. The Russians are saying that during the previous day they managed to establish few Russian flags above somewhere in Avdiivka on the new territories. Yet nobody has published this video with flags, but I warning you that these today, probably by the end of the day or maybe tomorrow in the morning, we start receiving the first videos with Russian flags somewhere in the central part of Avdiivka, or maybe let's say further into the central part or industrial A, the main supply road, or maybe even somewhere in the chemical plant. So we're expecting of videos with flags because we have additional update about that. When talking about the Kamyanka, let's say eastern part of Avdiivka, today we got confirmation from the Russian sources and from pro-Ukrainian sources and from neutral sources that as a result of Russian offensive operation, the Russians established control over the residential area by the name of Raduga. So this is the Gardens Association, Garden Holders Association, and this territory was captured by the Russians. Few important notes and things that you need to keep in your mind. Avdiivka is very small. As you can see, the clashes are taking place above all these streets. There are very fierce and close combat, and just pay attention how close the Russians put their aviation bombs. Of course, when talking about chemical plant, it's too far from the combat line. When talking about these two FAB strikes, of course, it's too close for the Russian positions that are storming right now, or maybe have already finished the battle for the bridge. And interesting video we got a little bit to the south from the main, let's say, area of clashes, from the central Avdiivka. On this video, we can see how the Russians were bombing this territory, these buildings, this residential area, with TOS flamethrower systems, with multi-launch rocket systems, with just regular artillery. That means, and this is very important because in any other offensive operation, the Russian commanders would not risk so much with infantry and the personnel inside of Avdiivka by using these tactics. But as we can see, the Russians are not in panic, but they're trying to break the situation. They're not giving Ukrainians even a chance because, with this attack with TOS flamethrower system, there was a very high chances to hit and to wound or to attack the crews and soldiers of Russian army. But you see that the Russians are risking, they're forcing, they're pushing, they're trying to break the situation completely and to create a cauldron. Very risky situation, very. Another important thing that we need to note is the report from the Ukrainian propagandist Yuri Butusov. This is probably the third time we're talking about him. The first time we talk about him when there was a battle for Tsarskaya Охота and Russian pipe operation, special operation. The second time we were talking about his report, about his, let's say, data he provides when the Russians managed to break through the Ukrainian positions, probably 2 or 3 days ago. And now we're talking about his report for the third time in a row. So based on his reports, based on information he provided, we see that he's very close to the combat and he has lots of very nice resources from the Ukrainian side, of course, and he operates with let's say the current situation. He knows exactly what happens on the territory, on the ground. And today he posted another interesting data. He was talking about the situation of Avdiivka. The situation is critical, that the Russians are bombing the town and the city, the buildings with FABs without counting, without even sometimes targeting. He reported and told the story that one building was completely reduced to ruins as a result of FAB strike. That was the base of FPV drone operators, but they managed, and they were buried by the ruins, but they managed to get out of the ruins by themselves. Also, he's saying that the Ukrainians, and he demanded to send anybody, everyone who can hold, let's say, rifle to Avdiivka to stop the Russian progress, because he's saying about endless hordes of Russian forces, of Russian infantry and so on, that it's impossible, even not like very likely, it's impossible to hold the territory. And he's adding that Ukrainian authorities, Ukrainian commanders took a decision and they're sending some reinforcement, but he's saying that he claims that resources and reinforcement that Ukrainians are sending is not enough, because the Ukrainians are sending, note the important thing, engineers, drivers, cookers, I don't know. So everybody who is not, let's say, doesn't fit the requirements of fighting with the Russians. Just here, engineers, I don't know, maybe soldiers of air defense forces. So he's saying that that Ukrainian military authorities sent to the combat line to stop the Russians the soldiers of very poor quality. And this is probably the most important update of the 6th of February 2024. I'll explain to why. First of all, he claims and he says that this is a very bad thing, that this is a very bad signal. And most of the Russian propaganda channels took this piece of news and start spreading among the Russian segment of the internet, saying that Ukrainians have problem in Avdiivka, that the situation is critical, that there is a crisis, that engineers and bus drivers and cookers are fighting with the Russians, and so on. But if you ask my opinion, I see this piece of news completely different way. As I understand, I analyzed this post for a very long time, and I made the conclusion that basically the Ukrainian military authorities have already accepted the loss of Avdiivka. So they have already accepted this situation. I'll remind you that Zaluzhny a few months ago, maybe months ago, even in December, told that Avdiivka would fall, and it was necessary to withdraw this city like a month ago. So Ukrainian authority finally and basically accepted the loss of Avdiivka. And if they accepted the loss of Avdiivka, why do they need to send mechanized brigades, special forces that were trained in the Western countries to drive Leopards and Challengers to fight with the Russian offensive, let's say, army? There is no need to do this. The only thing now the Ukrainians are thinking about is how to win time and how to withdraw their positions and how to evacuate soldiers from the farthest eastern position or even from the central one. And to do this, the Ukrainians took a decision. They made one smart decision. They start sending mid waves to stop the Russians, or if they can't stop the Russians, then to exhaust the Russians by engineers, by bus drivers, because they can hold rifle, they can hold machine gun, maybe they can send, let's say, drop grenades. So it's the best thing they can do with the purpose to exhaust the Russian army. And maybe after the Russian army will be exhausted, then they can make some plan or some permission to finish the battle of Avdiivka and to reduce the losses among the professionals. So the situation in Avdiivka completely repeats the story in Bakhmut, with one difference. If you remember the battle for Bakhmut, Zelensky and Zaluzhny took a decision to waste their best brigades in the battle for that stronghold, and they waste them all till ruins, till zero. And now is the same situation, but now Zaluzhny and Zelensky took a decision to save the best brigades, not to send them to fight with the Russians, but to fight with the Russians with very poor quality soldiers, with one purpose, to exhaust them. So we'll see what is going to be the next things from this area. Obviously, all these updates that we just discussed, we received probably a few hours ago. The only new update is about the Russian flags and other things. So we need to wait, because very likely tomorrow we're going to receive more details. Interesting situation is coming from the southern part, from the southern direction of Avdiivka, from the former air defense base. According to the Russian sources, as a result of offensive operation, the Russian army managed to penetrate the Ukrainian defense belt and to establish control over this territory. According to the Russians, this is 218 hill. It's like high, let's say, land. It's like territory. It's a hill, first of all, and from this territory the Russians have a very good observation, very good control over the Ukrainian positions in the 9th quarter, and of course over the Ukrainian positions in the former air defense base. And of course from these positions the Russians have already established physical control, fire control over the road T0505. So that was the operation that the Russians conducted today. But important thing that this road hasn't been cut off by the Russians, because according to the sources, there is like a tunnel or underground facilities that Ukrainians can use to redeploy their forces from one side of Avdiivka to another. So this is of course very important progress and achievement. Obviously the Russians will try to develop this attack further, but for now nothing special, just another improvement of the Russians and another reduce of Ukrainian positions. Also, we continue receiving the videos of bombings and attacks of Ukrainian positions in the former air defense base. the outskirts, as you can see, the edge positions, and there are still no clashes and no operation in the central part. Now we are moving to the south, to Novomykhailivka area. As we discussed, the Russians launched another offensive operation, and as a result of another attack, they managed to establish control over additional squares, and basically the Russians entered Novomykhailivka itself from the east. And today we got a lot of posts from different mappers, and according to information we have, as a result of offensive operation, the Russians managed to bypass the Mirnaya Street. This is Miru Street, this one. We don't know how deep the Russians managed to enter this street, but according to the Russians, they managed to dig in deeper and to, let's say, to hold the positions and repel few Ukrainian counterattacks. Additional Russian sources reported that they entered Novomykhailivka also from the southeast, and that this bridgehead was also captured by the Russians. So the official ground operation in Novomykhailivka has started. The Russians will continue movements, and obviously this is not going to be a very long battle like the battle for Avdiivka. And the most important part is also what kind of decision the Ukrainian authorities are going to make about the Novomykhailivka. Why I'm saying this? Because according to information we have, Novomykhailivka is under protection of 72nd and 79th Brigade, 72nd Air Mobile and 79th Air Mobile and 72nd Mechanized Brigades, two the most powerful and experienced brigade. And now the Ukrainian authorities need to make a decision to waste these brigades for the ruins of the village, or to step back, to withdraw their positions, but to save the personnel and to move towards more reliable positions west of Novomykhailivka and Konstantinovka, where they can dig in deeper for prepared fortifications and to win another month or two of clashes for this territory. I suppose that Ukrainians will choose the second option. They will leave Novomykhailivka, and very soon maybe they will also try to protect this territory with some territory defense brigades to win some time. But this will not stop the Russians, and obviously the development and the progress of this battle is going to be much faster than, let's say, the battle for Bogdanovka or the battle for Avdiivka. On Marinka direction, we have additional geolocations of FPV drone strikes. The Russians got stuck on the next defense belt. Now it's very difficult to bypass this territory. There are a lot of jobs for FPV drones, and this is exactly what they're doing. From interesting videos, we should pay our attention to a published video of Russian bombings of Ukrainian defense belt to the south of Georgievka. On this video we see how the Russians were bombing another Ukrainian stronghold. This video can mean that very soon the Russians will try to attack in this direction as well, with the purpose to capture the strongholds on this line and to get the operational space. So basically I'm saying that very likely soon the Russians will conduct this attack, and we'll see the results. Now we are moving to Bogdanovka area, Bakhmut, Artyomov's direction. We haven't received almost anything from this territory, just few geolocations of FPV drone strikes on the main stronghold line. We have a video of Ukrainian bombings of Russian positions to the north of Bogdanovka, which confirms that the Russians managed to restore control over this territory. So the Ukrainians were attacking the Russian positions there. So we will adjust the map and we will show this territory under complete Russian control before the next video. And we have another destroyed Ukrainian ammo depot in the village by the name of Kalinovka. So nothing special, just a regular military routine. We see that the activity in this area was reduced after the Russians entered and got the main defense belt. When talking about Bilogorovka, as we discussed, the Russians launched another offensive operation in direction of the city. We haven't received any geolocated confirmation or anything about the progress, but the Russians are saying that they managed to establish control over two important points on this direction. For now, no geolocations or scenes or pictures about the progress. For today, we haven't received anything from Terny-Liman direction. That was the first day probably since the creation of the front line for the previous few months, about even weeks, about some activity. So probably we're going to receive the updates tomorrow, because now everybody is focused on Avdiivka and everybody expect the video with the flags that the Russians promised to publish this night. When talking about Sinkovka, the Russians renewed their offensive operation in direction of the city, of the village. First, they're trying to bypass the village from the west, and according to information we have, they started offensive operation using the broad front line, and they're trying to enter Sinkovka from many directions. And we have geolocated videos of Ukrainian FPV drone strikes against one of the Russian positions, not even on the northern part, but a little bit closer to the central one, which confirms that the Russians managed to stretch their positions and stretch their control around the village. And probably that's it about Sinkovka. Very important updates and interesting videos are coming from Vovchansk. I'm telling you that very soon, probably within the next 3, 4 or even 2 months, the Russians will launch the ground operation in the city, because we continue receiving significant geolocated videos from this territory. On this video, for example, we can see the use of another FAB, and as a result of strike, another Ukraine ammo depot or barrack was destroyed, where the Ukrainians were keeping probably some munition or armored vehicles or something like this, and the very heavy explosion, secondary detonation, and this is another strike, another explosion in the city during the months. And it's a crazy situation in Vovchansk. Vovchansk has been reduced till ruins probably. And we got another video from the area a little bit to the east from Vovchansk, another FAB. Another Russians managed to discover another ammo depot of the Ukrainians, and as a result of FAB, we see a secondary detonation and very heavy explosion. To understand the picture in Vovchansk, of course, it's better to increase the updates for 1 month. We see some concentration of focus in Zybne, Bachkova area. We see concentration of focus above Vovchansk itself, lots of explosions, lot of FABs. And the borderlands, so obviously something very big is going to happen very soon. Now we are moving to Kiev. We have additional reports from the Kiev as well. As we discussed, the Ukrainian authorities, deputy, let's say, adopted the extension of the martial law for another 90 days. And I'll remind you that this is the last legal extension of martial law. The next one will be in May, and in May, Zelensky and the Parliament of Ukraine are going to be illegal because their terms end in the end of March. Also, we got update that Ukrainians are planning to make the conduct an audit of the actions of armed forces of Ukraine for the past 2 years during Zaluzhny period. And as I understand, the Ukrainian Zelensky himself are going to blame Zaluzhny in every single sense, in every single corruption schema. So they want not just dismiss him, they want to, let's say, destroy his reputation and to, let's say, secure any, let's say, possible next possibilities from his side to, let's say, to put himself as the candidate for the president, as the president. The United States of America reported there are going to be no military help for Ukraine, nothing, and so the situation, that means, is going to be very difficult. Furthermore, we got additional video from Belarus. Wagner forces continue training process of Belarusian special forces and the Belarusian soldiers. Today they finished the trainings and military exercises of another batch. I'll remind you that just a few days ago we got report that another batch of Belarusian special forces reinforced the border with Ukraine. Today we got another update. So according to my understanding and calculations, by May, by the end of the May, Belarus will be able to train up to 5 or even more brigades of special forces by Wagner's, and this is going to be a very big treaty for the Ukrainians on the Ukraine-Russian border, Ukrainian-Belarus border. And that's it for today. Military Summer channel reminds to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.